welcome to State of the University address. Our theme for the fundraising campaign this year was pursuing our potential. Calendar year 2023 has been a lot. Let me just put it that way. 2023 has been a lot. And you've gotten a picture of some of that. I mean, certainly, you heard Faith and I talking about the accreditation process, which has been intense this past year. Anyway, it's been a lot. But what it has been a really important growth process. Signum has so much potential. And we are, I think, I'll talk about this a little bit more, but my conviction is that Signum's been going through a lot of growing pains. There's been pain this year. It's been growing pain. If you've ever been involved in a startup, you know that there comes a moment, right? There comes a point when all of a sudden things have changed, or rather things need to change, right? Usually it's about growth, right? When you've grown to a particular point in the startup mode, right? You've got a small number of people working together and everything's pretty casual, right? You don't really have like set job descriptions maybe necessarily, right? So you can be kind of casual and loose with things, and everything's kind of, sort of easygoing, and nobody feels the need to identify everything and all that stuff. But there comes a point. Again, usually it's with growth, often it's with employee growth, where you reach a point a tipping point, where you say, okay, if we try to continue in the way that we've always been, we're at serious risk of things starting to come apart, right? Our efficiency is going to break down. We're at risk of losing our focus as an institution. The culture that we have had, which is so often in startups, such a really fun part of their, of that experience, and all of those things can, and if you're not careful, it's the point at which you either start to collapse or you start to become just another company, right? And you lose that thing that made the startup so special, so different. Again, if any of you have had experience with a startup, I think you'll know what I'm talking about when I talk about that moment. Early, really end of 2022, I began to feel that we were approaching that moment at Signum. Now, at Signum, it's been kind of different. It's been kind of different because we're a nonprofit, so it's not like the same environment as like a for-profit, startup. For one thing, ours, instead of a small dedicated group of entrepreneurs, working off of startup capital to build this new thing, we had a larger number of volunteers who were all contributing out of their passion and from their experience in various different ways. The number of people we've had working with us at Signum, just the number of humans contributing, has always been larger than your average startup, because that's how we've been. But still, in our own separate and different way, I began to sense that we were reaching that point, that in order to reach our potential, we had to, not even just about making changes. We had to be deliberate about it. We had to set out to pursue that potential. It wasn't just going to happen. We couldn't just continue the way we'd been. We couldn't, even though that's really attractive in a lot of ways, right? To just continue, right? When you've loved the way that things have been. And so it's possible to kind of blind yourself to the need to continue saying to yourself, oh, it's been awesome. Let's keep doing more of it. But if you're not careful and if you're not deliberate, it's not going to remain awesome. And that's just the reality of how these things are. So the first thing I did when I was sort of realizing this is that I wanted to, of those three things, efficiency, focus, and culture, the first thing I wanted to focus on was focus, ironically. That is, I went back to essentials. We have a mission statement. We've had a mission statement. But our mission statement describes what we do. The thing that I wanted to, the first step that I made when I was feeling that we're kind of coming to this point of transition, and that has been the main thing institutionally speaking, that's what this past year, that's what 2023 has been about Signum working through that necessary growth. And it's not over, right? We're still working, but sort of moving forward with that. I felt that the most important thing to begin with, the most important thing to frame, is not just answering the what question, which are, as I say, our mission statement answered what we do, right? I wanted to answer the why question. Why do we do it? And what's more, I wanted to make sure that everybody connected with Signum University could answer the why question, right? If anybody asks, why does Signum University exist? What's the point of Signum University, right? Why should Signum University exist? What's the good of it, right? The mission statement doesn't answer that question. Again, it describes what we do, but it doesn't answer why we should do it. So I sat down to come up with a purpose statement to encapsulate why we exist, why Signum is important, why Signum matters. And I came up with the purpose statement. Yes, we've been crossing this unseen line. And the answer is, we share joy. We share joy. That's what we do. That's the purpose of Signum University. We share joy. I could do a whole keynote on this statement. I could talk for half an hour on each word in this statement. But as soon as the exercise that I did to kind of push myself to this, and this is maybe an exercise some of you have done for different things, maybe for your own personal career goals. I recommend it, actually. It was extremely fruitful for me to do this. And that's, the exercise is simple. You keep asking yourself why. You keep asking yourself why, right? What do we do? Okay, this is what we do. Why do we do that? Well, we do that for this reason. Okay, but why do we do that? Right? Well, we do that for this other reason. Well, why does that matter? Right? And you keep asking why until you get down to what you realize. And often we're good at not thinking this through, right? We don't really acknowledge these things. But when you get down, in my experience, anyway, my experience of doing this was when I got down to bedrock, I knew it, right? And what I realized was that joy is the bedrock. Sharing joy, that's why Signum exists. That's what we're for. And as soon as I thought of that word, the word joy, and the concept of sharing it, I realized that it's like when you've come to a good reading of a text, when you're trying to figure out what's going on in a passage and you finally see the pattern, right? When it all kind of gels and you can see a reading which, once you see it, helps make sense of everything else, right? And I was like, yeah, no, that's the pattern. That's what we do. Then that's why we do it. What motivates me to start new programs? Why do we do the things that we do? And this is something people have asked, right? Hey, aren't y'all a university? You have a graduate program. Okay, that's like quasi-normal, but I say quasi because we don't have an undergraduate program, and that's what makes it abnormal. But anyway, it's quasi-normal. Why would you launch a space program? Why would you launch the adult education program, right? Why do you spend so much time going around to regional moots, right? Why do you, why are you launching this new program you're going to launch in like 15 minutes? Why do you do all these things? Answer, because we share joy. And that's anyway, that's the point. That's what we do. It is the perfect frame for everything that Signum is. And as we have turned to confronting the challenges of working through this transition, working through of growing up, as we mentioned earlier, adulting, like it's time for us to do more adulting is one of the metaphors I have often used about this as well. This has been the heart of the focus, to always keep firmly in mind the point of Signum University is to share joy. Now, let me show you about the transitional moment that 2023 has been in a different way. This time I'm going to show it to you with bar graphs. As is traditional, I'd like to do a little update about our financial situation. This is what I shared with you last year. This is the trend of our total revenue over the last 4 years. As you may remember from last year, it was like modest growth, right? Like 10% growth-ish between 2019 and 2020. And then we got this big growth, right? A 30% growth into fiscal year 2021. And then we got, almost 50% growth going into fiscal year 22. So we have this rising curve, which is really, really exciting. And, looking at this, and when we were looking at this last year and stuff, there's always the question, like, that curve isn't sustainable, is it? Like, we're not going to continue like this, not only growing every year, but the rate of growth growing every year, right? We're talking about not only the first, but the second differential, right? To reach back to my fond memories of calculus. I'm like, that can't continue in that way, right? That's gotta change. And it did, but not the way you might think. Here's fiscal year 2023, where our total revenue has actually grown by more than 100%, about 110%. Now, a big part of this is the merger with James's Eldarion Group. The revenue that Eldarion was receiving through things like educational grants, through a partnership with Tufts University for Perseus, for instance, is one way in which we earn revenue through Eldarion. That was a big chunk, but not the only chunk. Like, that does not explain that whole jump that was made. It's crazy, actually. And again, if any of you have run businesses before, you know that a jump like this is very exciting, but also very challenging, actually. It brings its own set of challenges. So, for instance, here's another set of numbers that I've been sharing for a few years, because this is something that's super important to us at Signum, and that is the increase of staff pay, right? As you know, running a business, there's nothing I love better than paying people. I love hiring people and paying people. And this was something that was an issue for us, back in fiscal year 19 and 20. We were paying our faculty, but most of our staff was still volunteer. And so you'll remember over the last couple of years, I've been talking about this, how we've been working on increasing decreasing. Well, I hate to say decreasing volunteer hours. It's not like we don't want people. There's still people who volunteer, who say, "Hey, I love what you're doing. I don't need pay, but I would love to get involved." I'm not going to say no. People come and do that. So again, it's not like we're trying to kick those people out. The point is, there were a lot of people in the early days who were like, "I believe in what is going on here at Signum. I do need pay eventually, but I'm happy to begin working for free, working as a volunteer." And it's those people that we wanted to bring in and be able to begin paying. How many employees of Signum are there? Rare. No, about 50 or so right now. Anyway, but this is through last year. So as you can imagine, right, this year grew. The 2023 effect, we had an even larger percentage increase of our staff pay than we had of our total revenue. And it's, anyway, it's a lot, right? It's a lot. So, but as I say, I was, there are wonderful things about this. This is, in so many ways, this is us living, or at least beginning to live, what was only a dream 4 years ago, and this is delightful. However, there are challenges. There are challenges with this as well. All of a sudden, we've gone from an organization just a few years back, right? I mean, look at this. 2020, we had a total revenue, gross revenue of $220,000, right? And now, in fiscal year 23, all of a sudden, our monthly payroll is like almost 70 grand, right? I mean, our monthly payroll only, not counting any other costs or anything else, our monthly payroll in fiscal year 23 was right about 1/3 of our entire annual gross revenue from fiscal year 2020. I mean, that kind of growth is challenging. It's exciting, and it's challenging, it's let me point out the other numbers that I like to share with you. Our annual fund. So our annual fund has now, as I said before, it's been over. This is our donations, the donations that you guys so generously make. We've been over $100,000 in total donations for the last 2 fiscal years now. Fiscal year 22 was higher, and that was, and again, everyone who runs nonprofits will be able to tell you about years like this, when we happened to receive a couple large gifts that were not repeatable necessarily. They were sort of occasional in their, they were on particular occasions. So not necessarily to be assumed for each year. But anyway, so that's why it went down this past year. But again, looking at the trend from the years prior to that, you can see we're still doing very, very well. And this year, we're already at almost $110,000, and that counts gifts and it counts our monthly subscriptions. As I said before, we're sort of crediting people for the monthly donations for the rest of the fiscal year as well, and that all adds up to an anticipated annual fund amount as of today of $109,600. That means if we raise about $20,000 more between now and the end of July, that would put us right around, we'd be getting close. If we'd be at 130, and that's the goal that I would love to be able to hit. If we could get $30,000 more, we could break the all-time record. So this is it's that the record is in reach, right? It's really It's really exciting. You guys have been so generous in your response to our needs this year, and in support of all the things that are going on at Signum. But I will say, the growth, as I say, it's a mixed blessing, right? It's definitely a mixed blessing, especially when you keep in mind what Signum's challenge has been from day one. From day one, we began with nothing at all financially. I don't know of any other university. I'd be interested if there were ever a university that started without any startup capital, right? Usually, of course, if you go to universities and ask them what their origin story is, normally their origin story begins with a rich person who, made an endowment, and that was the beginning of this university, right? Like that's the most common by far form of origin story. We had nothing at all to begin with. When we launched our first class, I was launching it on faith. We used the tuition revenue we earned from that class to pay the faculty who taught that class, because we had nothing else, right? We've never had reserves. Signum University has operated essentially hand to mouth from our very first semester. Over the years, we have, as we've grown, we have had a slow growth and some accumulation of savings as we've tried to, to prepare more and more for the future. But we've been, there have been times when we've been dreaming of having a shoestring over the course of the years. That's just, we've always found ways to make it work. Well, 2023 changes the math completely, right? Just remember that growth curve, right? And one of the things that it means is when your revenue is growing by 30% and then 50% and then 110%, the little bit of savings that you grew to try to build up a contingency fund means less and less every year, right? Because you keep leaving it behind. And now we're operating on a whole new scale, right? It's like, I don't know, there have been times when it has felt this past year like, suddenly sitting down at a much higher stakes poker table, right? And it can get a bit anxious, right? But the hardest challenge has been, as always, we've never really had any margin for error, and the contingency fund that we had got ate up in the general, fluctuations of revenue at that scale. What used to be back in the days of having a $200,000 gross revenue, what used to be a fairly comfortable contingency fund, it doesn't last you anything anymore in the new world. So we've been operating with very little margin for error, and then challenges arise. There have been difficult challenges this year. Two things I would mention. One has been, as many of you know from personal experience, through the accreditation process, we have been complying with a complicated set of state laws, which effectively forbid us from accepting students in about 50% of the states around the country. I can't explain to you exactly, well, I can explain to you why that is, but it's a long, sordid, and disreputable story. And I have neither time nor particularly the inclination to tell it right now. But in any case, we have been, and what that has meant is now we are 3 years in to, for the last 3 years, we have had to turn away 50% of the people who have wanted to take our graduate courses. Our graduate enrollments have begun as a course of that long period of having to turn away so many people who were excited to learn at Signum. our numbers have started to decline in the graduate program. It's been catching up with us finally. Had we been able to accept all of the wonderful and qualified people who wanted to study with us, our graduate program population would have grown tremendously over the last 3 years. Yeah, yeah. Carrie waving her hand from Oregon. Yes, exactly. Anyway, that's begun to hurt financially. That's begun to hurt this year. As we continue persevering, that problem, should we succeed in successfully completing the accreditation review process, that problem will go away. But again, as I said before, we don't know when or if that is going to happen. We can't promise that. So we're, in the meantime, working it through and trying to continue continue through those kinds of challenges. Another thing, the revenue through the Eldarian program has enabled wonderful growth at Signum, but it also has put us in a different world. We're used to our revenue coming in hundreds of small bits from tuition that's being paid by students and registrations from students and things like that. Now we're sending large invoices to companies. And you know what I've discovered? Here's a shocking piece of business news for you. Sometimes when you send a large invoice to a client, they don't always pay instantly. It's a sad but certain truth. And there have been some situations arising in which some of our client payments have been tied up in bureaucracy for months. There are two of our clients who have to this day not paid us for 6 months now, and that's, remember I said we don't have any margin for error. So it's been exhilarating. Neither of these things would be a problem if we had a cushion built, but we don't have a significant cushion anymore. And so we've been operating on this higher tightrope with pretty much no net over the course of this year, and that's been exciting, but perhaps a little bit more excitement than we exactly want. We're going to be sort of finding our feet in this new place that we have come to. We're going to be rebuilding a new contingency fund as soon as we can. It's a good year to be approaching that all-time record for donations. This is something, I reflect on this a lot. It's hard for me not to think about it. I did my undergraduate education at Williams College in Massachusetts. I did my graduate education at Columbia University in New York. And I am sometimes approached by the alumni offices of those two fine organizations asking me for donations. And I'm just like, look, people, okay? Like, I know the size of wonderful institutions. I fully support Williams, Columbia, marvelous, marvelous schools who have billions of dollars in endowment. Billions, literally billions. I think about the donations that people make to these institutions, often these sort of prestige donations. And I think of the difference that even a tiny fraction of some of the donations made to some of these larger schools could be at Signum University. This is a time, at this moment, of both the institutional transition I've been talking about and the financial transition I was just describing. This is a wonderful moment for help, for us to build that financial foundation we've never had before, for us to be able to put a solid financial net under the tightrope that we're walking on right now, in order to ensure Signum's continued growth. what we have accomplished at Signum, what we do at Signum, the joy that we share at Signum is real and is important. I think this is something that I am confident that we are going to get to that place. But this is a moment when we need help. And it's hard. There's something, I mean, as somebody who has been poor for much of my life and someone who has been running an institution which has been poor for its entire life, there are some ways in which, I look at charts like this and I'm like, man, we have so much money now. How it's hard to ask for more money when we already have more money. But this is when the support that we need, it's a different kind of support, right? And if we can find it, if we can find, and man, the transformational difference it will make for Signum and for so many people, the joy that has been shared and that will be shared by Signum, the impact, even if it's very often a sort of intangible impact on people's life that we've been making, and what we can continue to do, it's going to be really exciting. So we've been holding strong to this vision of sharing joy as we work through the challenges and opportunities that fiscal year 23 has brought. Last year, we announced the Signum Press and the Signum Studios, and we began to lay some groundwork, did some experimentation, learned a lot of things over this past year. There's a new way in which we're excited about sharing joy as we move forward. We continue to move forward into pursuing our purpose. Next, what we're going to do next is we're going to announce the new thing that we've been working on. I am so excited to tell you more about that. It is time to launch officially the Signum Collaboratory. Thank you for all of your attention and support. And again, thank you many, many times. For those of you who would like to make a donation to help support Signum University, signumuniversity.org/donate is the donate form. Anyway, so we'll take a very brief break and we will return soon in just a few minutes for the explanation and announcement of the collaboratory and the fun projects that are going to come through the Signum Collaboratory as we move forward into another new stage of sharing joy with all of you. All right, so stay tuned. You will get our new vision for sharing joy very soon.